Welcome to this webinar. We're going to talk about real-world examples of real-world projects and status updates, how you would handle that on an agile project versus a traditional project, to maybe portfolio level, executive level, or different ways you might report on this. So just some orientation. The chat is free. Feel free to use the chat in there. Ashley is a facilitator. Say hi to Ashley. She'll monitor the questions, monitor the chat if anything comes up. Feel free to ask your questions in the Q&A action on the bottom of the Zoom bar at any time. We'll do a 45-minute presentation and then open up for questions for the last 15 minutes. The session will be on our YouTube channel if you miss it, or if you want to share it with someone else afterwards as well. We will have a couple polls that will pop up on the Zoom tool, so keep an eye out for that. But I'll point out when we're doing those polls. So my name is Fred Mastropasqua. I'm a certified Scrum trainer. I'm an Agile coach. I'm a PMI, ACP, a bunch of other certifications. I started my career out in the hardware software, then became a certified network engineer on the Microsoft stack. After I got done doing networking things, I moved over to the software stack and went up the ranks there as a software engineer. And then about maybe 10, 11, 12 years ago, I found myself leading a team as director of application development, building a multi-million-dollar healthcare product for a $5 billion company, a huge undertaking, big audit tool, still used today. And I knew there had to be a better way to deliver products and better way to get product out the door. And that's what started my Scrum Agile journey. Is I read about Scrum in a couple of books, and there wasn't much out there back in 2009, 2010. It wasn't as prolific as it is now. And so I went on to start taking training, getting certified, and I fell in love with Scrum because I saw the actual benefit it had to the teams when we actually applied it properly and seeing that transformation journey. And so that's a little bit of my background. I am heavily on the enterprise product development in my background space, even though Scrum is used outside of that and for all the kinds of projects. But this presentation is really focused on software development, SaaS maybe development, any type of software-based product development, at least for this conversation we're having today. So a quick poll Ashley is going to put out there for you guys in the Zoom. And the first poll is just what's your role within your organization or in how you're applying Scrum, if you have one, right? So that'll pop up here. So I see product owners, coaches, Scrum Master, other, that could be a developer, that could be all kinds of things, right? Project manager. Yeah, that traditional sense of a project manager. That's good. So we have about 50% Agile Coach Scrum Masters, 52, 30% product owners, and you guys can see that. So I think we got, everybody answered. So nicely done. All right, that kind of gives me an idea of what we have in here. A couple of PMs, welcome. We appreciate you guys coming in. All right, so traditional versus Agile project updates. So traditional way, a lot of us are familiar with this red light, green light, stoplight type of status reporting, right? And just to level set where we're at, typically on a traditional project, we'll report green light. The project is on track to deliver with expected functionality and expected, quality, right? That's typically what we mean by green. Then we may report that the project is yellow. There's major issues or a ton of small issues that might jeopardize the schedule or maybe not get the expected functionality or quality possibly. Then we have red. We report on red. Usually there's issues that are going to have to extend the project deadline or greatly reduce the expected functionality or quality. And that's traditionally how projects are reported on status, right? Red, green, yellow. A lot of us are familiar with there. So how that applies to traditional reporting from that is usually based off something like a Gantt chart, right? And that's typically how we would lay out that traditional type of project. So quick poll to you guys then is on the Gantt chart. Are you currently using a Gantt chart to report project status? I'm just curious of how many you are, how many are you, and how many are you not, right? I probably should have said have you previously used one, but I think everybody would have said yes in that case. So what's interesting for those that are voting yes, you can see that must be an alternative view because there's a lot that are also saying no. So 61% no, do not currently use one, 13% yes, which is interesting. And then maybe 25% sometimes as needed. Yeah, that's a good. So thank you for that. So we take this traditional Gantt chart, and I'm going to simplify it here, and what we call the quote waterfall process that you might have heard or refer to, because it looks kind of like a waterfall as we go from stage to stage to stage. And how it works traditionally is we do all, maybe in software, I'm talking software specific here, but we do all the requirements up front. Then we move on to the design phase. Then we move on. Then we take all that, hand it to the development team. They start executing on that, those requirements, those designs, and then we move into the testing phase. And so, me being the efficient traditional manager that I am, I have these siloed based teams. So we're going to have a design team that's going to focus on design. We'll have a development team, and we'll have a QA testing team. And we have these, what we have called siloed based skill set teams. And if I have another project that pops up, well, I don't want my designers just sitting around not doing anything while we're developing on project A. So I'm going to send them off to another project, right? And then when the project A is in testing, I want to be efficient with my developers. I'm going to send them off to a second project. And then what happens is project A still has some issues, or maybe there's still some development. Maybe we have to go back and redesign something because it's not working. And now we have people that are split. This is how we get into somebody's on multiple projects, multiple teams, and now we're increasing their context switching, and we're narrowing down their bandwidth of availability because they're having to jump back and forth between multiple projects. Another way to look at this is that we do all the requirements up front. We've delivered that. Then we do all the designs up front. And even within the development teams themselves, within that software development team, you have, front end developers, back end developers, and they're their own teams. I've worked with clients where it's like, this is the front end team, this is the back end team, this is the database team. And it's a very siloed approach on how we deliver product, right? And then we have our testing team. And so if we look at, with all that being considered now, we look at this timeline. So we start reporting on project status. Well, after all the requirements are complete, what do we report? We're green. We're looking pretty good. We're 20% into this project. Let's say it's a 10-month project. We're 2 months into this project and we are reporting green. Okay, this is amazing. We're still on track. Right now we do all the designs and then we'll report some phase gate reporting, right? 40% complete. And we're 4 months into the project now. And guess what? We're green. This is amazing. The issue with this is that 4 months into this project, 40% complete. Yes, you got to the 2 first phases, but think about what you've actually delivered to the company. You've delivered paperwork, really, in a sense. Like, it's easy to stay on track in these phases because just spend an extra weekend and you can catch up on the designs or the requirements in this and that. You've delivered nothing that actually works to the company. No, zero value delivery of product, but you have, it's essentially a lot of paperwork what you've delivered. Then we move into the development phase, and that's when we're trying to convert and put the rubber to the road and convert these requirements to actual product. And this is where we start running into issues, right? And so maybe 6 months into this 10-month project, now you're starting to run into issues because prior to that, it was all a lot of paperwork. It wasn't actual product that you were developing. Now they're trying to develop it. Now it's like issues. Now you run into, based on feedback, it didn't work the way we expected. The requirements don't make sense, and what have you. Then we might turn red near the end. As we move down towards this project, that we're not going to meet this timeline. We're 8 months in now, reporting red. So at this point, there's a couple options we have, right? Somewhere between yellow and red, we may have to cut scope. We may have to spin up another team. We may have to cut down testing time. We may have to get approval and extend the deadline, which might, maybe that's something we do. Typically we have to get out the door on that date, because usually a lot of times in a traditional project, executives are all about, this is the day I want something by this date. So let's say you cut scope. Let's say you cut a third of the scope out. The problem at this point is you've spent a third of that requirements on that scope. You spent a third of design on that scope. You've wasted company resources, company money on doing requirements and designs for something that we ended up having to cut at the end. And that's typically how we report on our traditional projects. And we argue in the Agile community that this simplified version of the waterfall process is not suited for complex projects where you're having to essentially figure it out along the way. So how does that work in the Agile mindset and Agile world? In the Agile world, we're doing a little bit of requirements and a little bit of design, a little bit of developing and then testing and then getting feedback on that. And so we're iterating in small increments of requirement, design, building, and testing. In order to accomplish this, we're having to create what we call cross-functional teams. All the skill sets necessary on that Scrum team or on that Agile team in order is going to be needed to deliver this work, right? And that might look visually something like this, where you have, in this case, two teams working in parallel. They both do a little bit of the requirements, a little bit of design within that sprint, right? Within that Agile iteration, they're doing all the things they would do in a traditional project, where they're doing in a small increments. And then you move on to the next sprint, right? Or next Agile iteration, and they're doing it again. And so you're getting small slices of work as you go forward. If I was to report this on and look at the same layout, 10-month project, and convert it to iterations, 20% in, as before, we're green, we're on track, everything's looking good. What actually happens in an Agile project is that you turn yellow a lot faster and a lot sooner. If you remember, before we were yellow at not until we got into development, right? Past 40%, because again, that was all paperwork. In this case, we're 40% yellow early because we've already started building the actual product. We're putting the rubber to the road a lot earlier from the very beginning. And so we're going to turn yellow faster. We're going to turn red faster immediately. This is not that the work is different in any way. It's the same problem we would have had before if we had done it the traditional way. We just know about it sooner. And so if we decide to cut scope, right, we can cut out scope and say the last 4 iterations, we're not going to implement those features. And we've also saved time in the requirements. We've also saved time in the design. Because we know earlier, we know if we have to do that, do we need to spin up another team? We know a lot sooner than we would have if we had just done it than the traditional way. Now, the reality is what I see on real projects is not what you see here, green and then yellow 40%. What typically happens, the reality is the minute we start, we're yellow, because you're starting to apply that product, that requirements to the development, and you're getting early feedback, and you're realizing from the very beginning as things arise or feedback arises. And so we're turning yellow almost right away, pretty early on. But we can make it green also right away. And then now because we can cut out scope early, we can expand the team early, we can address it a lot sooner than we would have before. So getting ready for a new project, we might have something as a portfolio Kanban board at a higher level for maybe executives to look at. Maybe a new initiative comes down, right? And again, these are optional, but things to consider. So a portfolio Kanban board is something that you're going to use at the executive level to take a look at and just understand where we're at. So maybe you want to do this online store. Some executive has an idea, hey, I want to do an online store. Great, it's a new concept. There's going to be here on the portfolio Kanban board, you'll see that you have new concept, market research, feasibility study, right, ready to build. These are all going to be more on the business side of the house. So we got a new concept. We do some market research. Is it worth doing? Right? Feasibility study. Do we have the people to even do it? Do we even know how we would build a store? Yes. Great. Then we want to move forward with this and ready to build. Right. And as new projects or initiatives come down, they can go through this phase of this Kanban board. Then when it's ready for refinement, meaning let's get some requirements and start building this. Right, so we're going to spend some time with the business gathering requirements, and we realize, okay, we have enough here for first release, and we're going to pull off from that online store. Maybe release one set of functionality and set of features. You'll notice that in the design, develop, test, that's ultimately your Scrum team there. You'll see that there's a WIP limit of 1. True Kanban board has a WIP limit, meaning we can't have more than this many of those items in that column. And the reason in this case is because we only have one team. And because we have one team, we're going to limit to they're working on one thing at a time, or at least at the portfolio level. If we had 4 teams, 4 different Scrum teams, our WIP limit might be 4. There's 4 active projects going on at the same time, right? And then this will at least give you an indicator at the executive level. Do we need more development teams? Do we need more Scrum teams, right? We can actually track the time, the enter time and the exit time for these items as they move into these phases, and you can build a cumulative flow diagram and show that the bottlenecks where those lie. So online store release 1, there's still more features we want in our online store, so then we create and spin off, another release 2. But we can't move that into development yet because there's only a WIP limit of 1, so we're waiting until something moves out. The Scrum team finally gets release 1, ready for release, moves into the next column. It's sitting there pending maybe an approval or whatever the company policy is. And then we move in release 2. And there's still more left over in the online store. So it's going to sit there and refine until we've received or collected all the functionality that needs to be done. Maybe there's a release 3, and a release 4, and then we're complete. And then those releases would then move into the next phase. So release 1 moves to done, and ready for release 2 is release 2. And so this gives you a high level status of where we are with the project without having to dive too deep into the weeds. It might look like this overall in this example, where you have various different projects. You have even maybe some feature requests that have come down, a new concept that you need to figure out where those go. But you can see at a high level on where we're at. And you see the bottleneck here is the WIP limit, right? We have 2 things in refinement that are sitting there. We have 2 things that are ready to build, and we can't move forward with those because there's things in front of that. Now, business could reprioritize. We could swap, take out the online store, put it back to ready to build, take project D and move it forward. But we can't move into WIP limit. We can't move into that one phase until we remove or pull back that item in there. You can have a next drill down. Let's say we want to drill into online store. You could have a portfolio Kanban board just for the online store, right? And here we're looking more at the process or the at the team level, things that need refinement, high functionality features, things that are in refinement, things that are ready for development. And again, we have that WIP limit of 1. Of all those things in release 2, we're currently working on process a transaction for credit cards. And that itself breaks down to even more backlog items that's within the Scrum team down at the product backlog level, right? But at an executive level, I don't care about all the PBIs that make up this process of transaction. I just want to know when it's complete. And so we might track at this level a percentage complete, possibly. But this kind of gives you an overview status of kind of like where things are and how things are tracking. Something we also put together is typically is a roadmap. What's the roadmap for the next 9 to 12 months out? Now, in this case, we have Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4. I personally don't like quarter-based roadmaps. I personally rather have a phase-based roadmaps because I don't always know the effort or if it's even possible to get it done in a Q3. I might ask for build me a time machine. I want that by Q4. And there's been no one to look at it yet to say, that's a really large, request, and it's going to take a while, and that's not going to fit in Q4. But you could do a quarter based, you could do fiscal year based, you could do based on seasonal holiday seasons, government compliance, tax season, things like that. However you decide to do your roadmap, but typically you want to do a high level roadmap for that project to kind of get an idea of what we're going to be working on in the future. So let's say we break that down. We've broken that refinement down. We're now going down to the closer to the team level. And we create a product backlog. All right, these were actually product backlog items from a real client. And for this example, I'm going to convert them all to say product backlog items A through AB. All right, so this is our product backlog. These are all the items in it. We now have to have our team size the items and give an effort to the items in the product backlog. So I'm putting another poll out there in that I want to know, what do you guys do? Do you use relative sizing? So just a poll on so that's comparing something to something else, not about how many hours it's going to take you or how many days it's going to take you, but this thing is medium work and it's the same amount of this thing that we did before that's also medium, or this thing is larger than the thing we did before that's smaller, right? So it looks like 94% are doing yes. Yep, so yes or no at 90 to 10%. So a lot of people doing relative sizing, 10% doing not relative sizing, so probably time-based estimating. There's benefits to the relative sizing. We won't get into that here. We do have a YouTube video if you're interested in that. But let's assume your team is relatively, this only works, what I'm showing you, works if you're doing relative sizing. Doesn't necessarily work if you're doing time-based estimating. So you'll see some of the benefits of relative size here. So let's say we had that team size the whole product backlog, and we get to 688 points. That's a total collection of everything we need to get done for this product, or maybe it's the release. And the team works one sprint, gets 26 points done, works another sprint, gets 15 points done. Relative size points are just the relative to all the items in there. We've completed 20 points. Typically, your velocity is based on the measure of the work that's coming out of the Scrum team. And so in this case, we're taking the average of the last 3 sprints. Usually you take the average of the last 3. But in this example, in a perfect world progress, let's assume we have 688 points. Let's assume the velocity is 20. Right? In a perfect world progress, that would be 688 divided by 20. That would give us how many sprints that we need to complete this work. That's 35 sprints if I round up. So I'm taking the total number of points divided by the average of points they get done per sprint. Right? I know that it's 35 sprints. We're doing 2-week sprints. So one sprint equals 2 weeks. So 35 times 2 weeks equals 70 weeks. So it should take me 70 weeks to complete 688 points if I know the team's velocity. This is also a case in why we argue in the Agile community of dedicated teams. Because I know a lot of companies will, we spin off new teams and form new teams, every new project, every new initiative, but you've lost all that history there. If you have a team that you can use and continue to use, that you already know what their average velocity is, then you can more easily predict from the very beginning. But a perfect world scenario, we do sprint 1, we do sprint 2, 3 to 7, because I didn't want to break all those down. Sprint 8, sprint 9, sprint 10, right? This one's 100 points, so sprint 11 through 15. We don't need to break it down now. We can break it down later. Sprint 16, 17, sprint 18 through 19. So we'll stop there. And notice it took us 19 sprints to get to item AB, right? That was that last item that was highlighted there. Unfortunately, that's not how it works in real life. In real life, what really happens is we do the first sprint and then we get feedback. And then we have to figure out, and then we size that feedback. And then we got to figure out where does that feedback go? And where are we going to put in all the other items we have? So we start shuffling around the product backlog. We move things around and we got to make room for this feedback. We take that feedback and add it into the product backlog. Right now we do the second sprint, which includes some of that feedback. And then we get more feedback. Right. Then we do the third sprint and get more feedback. And so what ends up happening is in this case now, after a couple of sprints, item AB is now sprint 22 or before sprint 19. So there's this risk factor of based on the feedback, based on some changes we need to make, there is a risk factor there we need to account for in some way. So if this backlog is 688 points, I need to apply some type of confidence factor, risk factor. It's going to be different for every organization. There's a book I'm going to recommend at the end, which actually goes into this a little bit, but my risk factor might be different than your risk factor, but something to consider. So for me, that I am 90% confident that I can deliver 60% of your project, right? That's 413 points. I'm 90% confident I can deliver 60% of your project. So I'm leaving this 40% buffer in a sense. Now yours might be different. If you're pretty confident on that won't be as much feedback, maybe you can deliver 90% confident you can deliver 70% or whatever that confidence factor is for you. For me, I am 50% confident that we can deliver 70% of what you asked for. And I'm only 10% confident that I can deliver 100% of what you asked for. So any client coming in, if they say, this is all the things we want, I know it's going to be more than that because it's not just the things you want. It's the feedback. It's the changes. It's the, it's the request or, oh, I didn't realize that's how it's going to function. Or now that I see it, that's not really what I want. Right. So there's that risk there. And so I'm definitely not going to say, yes, I'm 100% confident we can deliver everything you want within the budget schedule that you're stating. Right? There's a 40% buffer here that I need to account for feedback and changes. And again, in your organization, it might be 30%, maybe it's 20%. You're going to have to adjust that based on what you think fits within your org. So I have to work backwards, right? Clients can say, well, I want everything and I want you to be 90% confident in all the things. So I need to work backwards. I need to think, all right, if I'm 90% confident I can deliver 60%, then what's, how do I work backwards from that? 60% of 1,148 points is 689 points. And that's everything they're asking for. So then now I'm 90% confident I can deliver everything you asked for, but I'm going to base my SOW, I'm going to base my schedule, I'm going to base the budget on 1,148 points, not the 689. So I'm adding basically a 40% buffer to that 688 in essence. All right. And that's what was a Gantt chart, but that's what my project plan would basically account for. And if they have no feedback and and they love everything we do the first time, then great. We're going to deliver early and ahead of schedule and under budget. So in order to now do some predictions, I need to understand that, again, the team's velocity. So they do the first sprint, they do 21 points. Then all I can go is off of yesterday's weather. So 21 points is their velocity. And that's what we call it in the Agile community. You can base velocity based on yesterday's weather or the rolling average of the last 3 sprints. Second sprint, they do 17 points. I average that out, 19 points is their velocity. Third sprint, they do only 10 points. Someone was out, maybe we had run into a problem, but our average velocity now drops to 16 points, and so on. sprint 4, sprint 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and so on. So best case scenario, we've done 20 points as our average velocity. Worst case scenario, within the last 3, 4, 5 sprints, it's been 17. Or if I want to be super conservative, I can go back to, well, the worst we've ever done is 16. Right. So I might want to use that number if I want to be, if I'm going to be super conservative, but I would probably go with 17 to 20 because I know the team. I know maybe we've added some new people. We're getting better with the product. So I don't imagine us going back down to 16, but I think we're pretty confident that we're in the 17 to 20 range. So then I take that data and I put it into what I call a release burnup chart. Some of you may be familiar with this. So what you have here is the purple represents what's in the product backlog, the number of points based on their relative size, the number of points in the product backlog. The yellow on the bottom is what the teams completed sprint after sprint after sprint. So the actual number of points they've completed each sprint. And then the blue line is the cumulative amount of work they've gotten done sprint over sprint over sprint. And so what happens is, in order to know, someone says, when will this purple stuff be done? When are we going to be complete with this project? Well, I have to look at this cumulative line. So that's the cumulative line. When it crosses the product backlog line, that's when we'll be complete with all the work in the product backlog. So we're looking at maybe sprint 14, somewhere around there, right? So when that cumulative line passes the product backlog line, that's when I'm complete. And this is what really replaces the Gantt chart. And I'll show you another version of this, but this helps me predict now when we'll be done with that work. We have an Excel sheet. If you go to our website, you go to the Agile Tools section, you can download this Excel sheet. Actually, I'm going to show you another version of this coming up shortly off our website. So that helps me with scheduling. Now, what about budgeting? All right, how that works in the Agile world. We have a team of 5 salaried employees, let's say. And again, Agile is based on dedicated team members. Of those 5 salaried employees, let's assume they make $525,000 a year collectively. Right, that's a total amount of money the organization is paying out for all the people on the Scrum team. Well, if we're doing 2-week sprints, I can take that total $520,000 a year divided by 26 sprints in the year, and I get a cost of $20,000 per sprint. All right, so now I know that that sprint cost me $20,000. If I know their velocity, I can divide that $20,000 by the velocity, and now I have an idea of how many dollars per point relative. So if the team is between 17 to 20 points on average velocity, then the price per point is somewhere between $1,000 to $1,100. And so now I can apply that to my backlog items. And now that changes the conversation with executives in the sense of, you really want item U, that's roughly relative, it's around $15,000 it's going to cost. Right? That's almost a complete sprint. Right? Item T, right? Very inexpensive to complete. And so you can now apply a dollar amount to your product backlog items and have a different type of conversation with, instead of a client saying, I want everything and it's all important and I want this floating wizard on the screen. It's like, well, this is the cost relative cost associated to that. If you're doing hourly employees, you can do it the same way. Or you have 5 people, they're $100 an hour. It's going to be $100 times an 80-hour 2-week sprint work week times 5 days. It's $40,000 per sprint. And you divide it by their velocity, you can do the same calculation, whether it's hourly or not. From that information, if I was to do an SOW, we have an existing team, they're dedicated, we know their velocity, but we can figure out, I don't want you to have to do a change request every single time you want to change or a feedback. So what we'll typically do is do what we call a budget in a box. So maybe your budget's $300,000. Well, based on the point per sprint, I know that's around 255 points. I know also that's around 13 sprints. So $300,000, if that's your budget, whether it's some new initiative or you already have an existing team, you know their cost, right? You can kind of gauge it's 255 points or 13 sprints. So as long as you don't go over that bucket, then fill it up, right? You fill your product backlog and let's size things until we get to that 255. If you add something in that's worth 8 points, if you want to stay on track and on budget, you're gonna have to take something else out that's worth 8 points. So you're gonna have to swap things in, swap things out. This I'm typically fine with. Do this all day long. I don't really care until we start working on it. The problem is sometimes you'll get someone that says, well, I want both. And I want to stay within I want to add this and I don't want to take that out. And what can we do? In those cases, then we need to look at, do we have to deliver the Lamborghini version of every piece of feature or functionality? Right? Can we get away with what we call an MVP of that, even of that piece of functionality? then maybe we can drop down these points. Then maybe we can find a way to squeeze in two things. All right, so here's a chart that we have on MVP. And some of you I know have heard this term before. Right, in the top scenario, you have, the traditional way that you might build a car, but we're trying to solve the problem that a user wants to get from point A to point B. And they're like, I want a car. And so in the top scenario, we're doing it a very traditional way. We're building the body of the car, or the frame of the car, the wheels. Then we add on the body. Customer's not happy. They're just neutral because they're waiting. Right. Then we put in the seats and upgrade the wheels, put in the steering wheel. Customers getting mad because they're still waiting. They can't get from A to Z. So they're just sitting, waiting and waiting. Then we put in the engine, and then we have the full car at the end. And when we deliver the full car, they're still not happy because they're mad because they had to wait so long to even get the car. And then we can't help please them in any way. Bottom scenario is we're going to get you to point A to point B, but you have a frame with some wheels and a bicycle seat and a pedals and a steering wheel. That's your first version of the product. And the customer's not happy with it, but they can at least get there, right? And based on their feedback, it's like, you know what? I can't, this pedaling thing, by the time I get to work, I'm sweating and I'm a pile of sweat. And this has got to change. Great. We put in an engine in there. It's a stick shift, manual shift. And they're like, you know what? This is a lot better. I can go faster, but I'm getting bugs now. I'm getting that due to the speed, there's bugs are hitting my face and my hair is getting all messed up. And so, all right, we'll put it in a windshield and we'll put some lights on so you can see at night, and we'll block the wind with a windshield to block the bugs. Great. This is better. I love it, but I want to take somebody with me. And so then we add on the rear seats, and then we add on the lights, and then we make it an automatic possibly. They love it. They want to keep the wind going. They love the wind, feel of the wind, but they want to feel a little bit safer and not fall out. So we put in doors and we eventually complete the car. And it ends up being a convertible. They didn't even know they wanted a convertible, but based on the feedback along the way, we built a product that was more suited for them. You can apply this to both a product and you can apply this to a specific feature, right? I need this report. Great. We'll put it on the screen, right? Then later we'll add sorting, and then later we add filtering, and then you can export to Excel versus doing all that before they even start using it. Export to Excel, export to PDF, send me a scheduled email. I want to sort it, filter it. Like, to do your job, to be successful in your organization, you just need the data. Here's the data. Now go, use that data to make your decision, and we will come back and enhance it over time. So you want to limit the bells and whistles functionality, especially if you're trying to get more in. You want to deliver just enough to get the functionality, and you want to educate the customer along the way and get feedback along the way. Sometimes some people may ask, well, what does it matter? If you build the top scenario, you get a car, and you build the bottom and you still get a car, like, who cares? The question to ask is, what if funding is cut halfway, right? Or they run out of money, and you draw a line down the center. In the top scenario, they have no product. They have a partially built car they can't even use yet. In the bottom scenario, they don't have the car they wanted, but they can at least do what they need to do. They at least have some type of working product they can continue to use. Right. And so usually what we focus on is limiting some of the bells and whistles, even at the feature level, just to get through all the major steps of whatever it is product we're trying to build. So we do a couple sprints, and then we get feedback. And because I know the dollar per point and I know we size it, I can apply dollar amounts to all that feedback. And again, this takes the conversation to another level of how important is this feedback to you? Yes, I know you just wanted to move this thing down the screen, but that's still going to cost money. That's still going to cost time. Is that worth $2,000? Is that worth $2,300 over something that might be more important? That might cost less, might cost more, right? This thing you're asking for is $30,000. Is that really that important? Is it more important than these other things we need to get done? So it just changes the conversation a bit once you can do some calculations like this. So here I have a release burnup chart, another version of it. This is what really replaces the Gantt chart, in my opinion, is the colors are the same. So the purple is still the product backlog at the top there. The yellow is the actual sprint, and you see it flat lines like after sprint 3. That's because this is looking into the future, right? And we've only currently done about maybe 2 sprints in this one. The blue line is still the cumulative line. So based on our average velocity, we project the blue line is what our average velocity will be. The green line is best case scenario. Maybe that's 20 points a sprint. The red line is worst case scenario. Maybe that's 17 points a sprint. And so now the executives ask, when will we be done with this purple stuff, right? With this line here that kind of flying across the screen. When are we going to be done with all the stuff in the product backlog? Well, best case scenario will be done in sprint 17. Worst case scenario will be done in sprint 21. So sometime between sprint 17 and sprint 21. Well, what date am I going to have all this stuff? A date that falls between sprint 17 and sprint 21. Well, what month are we talking about? A month that falls between sprint 17 and sprint 21. I'm not ever giving you a date, because any date I give you, I'm making it up. I don't know. It's going to be, but I'll give you a range. It's between this date and this date is what we're anticipating, between sprint 17 and sprint 20, based on the data. And again, I'm using real data to make this prediction. I'm not using like some made up, I think it'll be done in this time. I'm saying based on the data, this is what it shows. I had a client I worked with, a big client I worked with. We had I knew the team's velocity. It was a big project, and they had done a couple of sprints. I took all the things the client wanted in the backlog, and I actually did this same thing that we're talking about today. I laid it all out, and I said, according to the data, it looks like we're going to be done sometime between August and September. And they about flipped out. It was, I think it was, it might have been like October, November the previous year. And I was like, August, September of next year is just based on the data. And they flipped out. They're like, that can't be. We can't do that. We need to have something by April. It's like, and just it's like we just pulling these dates out ahead. And so we can have you something by April, but it's not going to be everything by April, right? And they kept, always. So as the project moved on, it was funny because we kept saying April, and they're like, no, now we have to have it by June. Now we have to have it by July. At the end of the day, when you go back and look, the project ended up completing like mid-September, and it's just I just find it kind of like funny and ironic because it's like, we basically predicted that at the very beginning based on the data we had at the time, but nobody wants to believe the data, and everyone thought that was just crazy at the time. But it's just kind of, it was interesting story, and then like looking back, it was like, yeah, we should have just stuck with what we thought from the very beginning. So somebody asked, I have a conference, a user conference to go to, a sprint 9. So what can we have by sprint 9? Well, best case scenario, we'll have 200 points worth of stuff completed. Worst case scenario, 150 points worth completed. So somewhere between 150 to 200 points of stuff we'll have ready for that conference. So let's sit down and prioritize what's the most important 150 points of stuff in the product backlog, so that we're not working on things that you don't think are as important. Right now, if they look at the chart and say, the reason why it's good to visualize it is because they may say, oh, the purple line here, I want all the purple stuff by sprint 9. And you can see there's a huge gap there. Right, it's more easy. It's better to visualize that because you can see like that's not going to happen. Like there's no way I can bring that line down to sprint 9. You can see the huge gap there. If I don't show it visually, then usually I hear like, well, make it happen, figure it out. It's like you can see that's not even possible. Are there things we could do to bring in the date? Yes, we could spin up additional teams. We could maybe add maybe 1 or 2 team members, depending on the size of the team, because then that ends up working backwards and slowing the team down. But maybe we spin up a second team or a third team. I had a client spin up 3 more teams in order to bring the work in by 3 months, right? And because they realized that's what they had to do. So some projects, some things I show some slides I show in some real projects when I'm giving updates, maybe we'll do a sprint review or some project status update or sprint review. And I'll show for this sprint, we completed 7 out of the 7 stories that we had committed to. So 100% complete this sprint. Everything's complete and in stage or in production or wherever it's at. I may or may not show the average velocity for the team. Based on our last sprint, we're now at 30. I only show this if the receivers are mature in this number and what it's for. It's not meant to be bashing the team on the head and, oh, they need to work, more hours, or they're not working enough. It's like, this. If I don't want to pressure the team on the velocity in the sense of, because then they'll just change the estimates. 5s become 8s, 8s become 13. Right. So this has to be an honest estimate for the team and an honest velocity of what they're doing, because that's what I'm using for real data. So I may show the velocity there. I might do a product burnup report here. Same, it's a release burnup report. So in this case, you'll notice it's a little bit different than what you saw before. And you see a blue line is flat line. In this case, the blue line is what's in the product backlog. The yellow is cumulative and the green is per sprint at the bottom. But what you'll notice is that there's a light green at the top that's labeled feedback. So this represents maybe a statement of work or an SOW or that bucket. Remember that $300,000 bucket. So I might say, okay, our product backlog is flatline because we agreed to on a statement of work that we would do these 600 points worth of items. And that's what our statement of work is based on. But the client keeps adding things. Oh, I want to do this. Oh, and this too. Oh, this is a good idea. And so those things, I'll track those things, but those are the things that are in green now. You've added on another 75 points worth of stuff. If you want us to complete that, it's going to be additional money, and it's also going to push it back by maybe 2 sprints. and or swap things out possibly from the feedback to the product backlog. Right? But at least I can show like we're still on track for original statement of work and original budget and schedule, but you keep adding things. And so that's causing, you'll see that's causing the delay. Sometimes use this, sometimes I don't use this. That'll be on the Excel sheet too. I can also show budget wise because I know the cost per point. So cost per point based on the velocity, right? Your budget is 225,000 total. We have release one is around 150, 160. And all those other extra things you keep adding, that's going to be another maybe $25,000, $30,000. That's the green there. So you need another 25K if you want to include all those additional things that we talked about. I might even take the feedback and put it in an empty product, in an empty burnup chart just to show this is the extra, these are all the feedback items and things that are above and beyond what we agree to. Then I'll show what's coming up. Here are the things that were completed that are crossed out. And here are the things that are coming up in the future. We'll wrap up here. So then we get refinement, we get feedback, we show them working product, and I'll typically track that feedback. I'll get the team to size it. Then I can put a cost to it based on the, because I know the relative size, I know the cost per point. I can say, you know, if it's in a release one or release two, who asked for it, right? And where it came from possibly. And this makes it just again, an easier conversation because now I can take this feedback and say, okay, where do you want these things in priority with the other things you have in the backlog? Right. And so we can have that conversation, the cost of those things, and talk about whether that's going to delay things or not. So to wrap up, right, this is a great book here, The Art of Agile Development. It's very specific to software product development. This book's pretty good on a lot of different ways to estimate actual software development in an agile environment. So if it's something you're having to do or something you're more interested in, I definitely recommend picking up this book. And the conclusion is, right, it takes time, takes effort, requires estimating, it requires relative sizing. You have to have cross-functional teams to really be able to do this. And it takes courage, but it gets easier with practice, right? And only use what's needed. Don't force necessarily everything in there. And that completes the webinar on the topic and the main topic areas. We do have a next webinar next month. Rob Shaw will be talking about CapEx and how CapEx fits into the Agile world. And then that's it. So we will open it up for questions. All right, let's see. So we have a question. Let's see here. So in an Agile way, please share some tips to avoid being a feature factory. Features are built over time, but overall product result is a Franken monster. Yes. So feature factory, right? Some tips to avoid feature factory. That's like we're just pulling things in and the product never gets done. All right. We keep continuing to develop features and features and features. To me, you have to draw the line somewhere in that there's a couple of things you can think about is one, is it a feature that gets to the workflow? For example, if I'm doing an e-commerce platform, I need to be able to log in or I need to be able to find a product, add a product to shopping cart, pay for a product, get a receipt of the product. So there's a flow there that completes that whole transaction or use case within that product. So I'd want to focus on those features first that get through the whole workflow. Then the other features, are they one-dimensional features? Are they features that we're just really adding more bells and whistles to one area? Again, that report example, like export to Excel, export PDF, export to this, schedule it out. You're just really enhancing one specific feature. And I like to use the Kano model for that. You might want to look into, but it's focus on the features that get you to the whole workflow or through the story map of that user or the journey of that user, then come back and enhance them as needed, but draw a line there somewhere to say, okay, this is release one, this is release two, and then you're going to have to really bucket those features. So that's kind of hard to answer that one without understanding the specifics. But typically I try to figure out, are they one-dimensional features or are they things we can wait till later? If we don't need it right now, then, you know, I don't bother trying to add those things in at the moment. What if the entire product backlog is not known up front? How do you predict using confidence intervals in that case? So that's a good question. So I don't typically, so what we do at Clearly Agile actually is if you were to come to us and say, I want this product, I have this idea, we will spend 2 days with you story mapping out everything. We will identify the personas, we identify the user roles, the personas. We will figure out what do these personas and user roles need to do in your product. From that, we will generate a story map session. And from those steps of the process, like maybe like Uber Eats, like find a restaurant, order food, have it delivered. For all those steps, we're then going to break them all down. This is all done in this 2-day session. We'll break all those things down into epics, features, backlog items, and I'll have the Scrum team there, or at least maybe the lead of each skill set, just to give me some input into this. And we will relative size all the things in that story map as we're talking about them. We will actually create product backlog items written in the user story format. And from after 2 days, we've applied business value. We've applied the Moscow method of must have, should have, could have, would like. We've sized the items, and then we can take that back. And what we do over the next week is that we end the 2-day meeting and we put it all digitally into a system. And then I have to figure out, okay, which team is going to deliver this. I know their average velocity. If I don't have a team and don't know their average velocity, I'll have an existing team that has that skill set and say, based on that, what do you think, at best guess from your history, what do you think would fit in a first sprint, right? And so we'll look at the backlog, and we have the relative sizing, and we'll kind of take an educated guess of what we think fits in 1 sprint, second sprint, and 3 sprints. So we kind of like loosely plan out the first 3 sprints, taking a guess. Whatever they say, I cut that by 20%. And then based on that, I will use that as my prediction for, this is how much I think the SFW is going to be. This is how long I think it's going to take. This is how much budget I think is going to be required. So hopefully that answers that question. Thank you. And just to add on to the budget is fixed. Yeah. So if it's a fixed budget, then it's a conversation of we came back. The total cost is $500,000. You only have $300,000. So now we need to sit down and figure out what can we get rid of first. And once we narrow that down, then maybe of the things you did ask for that we need to keep, maybe we can limit some of the bells and whistles. Like you need to log in, but do you need Google integration, Facebook integration, Instagram integration? Let's just do Google, and later when you get more budget, we can include the rest of that. I'm going to say that one's answered. Let's see. Understanding that saying no to features does not provide business value is necessary. How do you say no to a feature that a client insists on adding to the end result? So how do you say no to a feature that a client insists on adding to the end result? So this is I would say a technique we talk about sometimes in class is saying yes to saying no. So again, it depends on the specific situation, but usually I don't want to just come across with a no. I want to usually come across with, yes, I'd love to, but, right? So one of those things is maybe time-based. Yes, I'd love to do that, but we'll have to do that later. Not right. We can't do that right now, but we'll do that later. So I'm not saying no, I'm saying yes, but I'm saying we'll do that later. You might do, I'd love to do that. So which one of these things would you like to remove? And then I present, pick one of these things to get rid of, and we can pull this in. So yes, I'd love to do that, but which one of these things are you going to give up? And hopefully we can have a conversation on what to remove in order to add this thing. Or it might be, I'll include the client with the priority in that list. So then if they do ask for something, then it's, okay, I'd love to do that for you. So remember that priority we created and the things you said you had to have, where do you see that fitting in with this, right? Are you willing to extend the budget, extend the schedule? Because you helped me make this list. And so you tell me how you think it fits in here. All right, that might be another way. So you got to find ways of saying yes by saying no by saying yes. Another technique again is just showing them the cost associated and then the delay it's going to add possibly to the project. So I don't know if that helps with that, but hopefully that answers that for anonymous. All right. What's your opinion on estimates based on hours, days? Oh man, yeah, I got a lot of opinions on this. One client uses it to question our estimates. Why didn't we get it done by X date to prioritize? Yeah, so that's exactly why I don't do hours and days and time-based estimating. So there's different ways you can estimate work. You could do ideal days. Ideal days is to say, hey, Fred, how long is that thing going to take you? And I say, it's going to take me 3 days. It's Monday morning. And so Monday goes by, Tuesday goes by, Wednesday goes by. Thursday morning, you come back to me, you're like, hey, is that thing done? You told me it'd take 3 days. Oh, no, it's not done. I got interrupted. I had to go help so-and-so. I had to go to the doctors. And so when usually developers give ideal days, it's completely uninterrupted time, left alone. Possibly that's how many days it's going to take. And that's what we call ideal days. So it's not ideal to do ideal days. You could do time-based estimating. The problem with time-based estimating, like hours, and this even fits with ideal days, is that as humans, we're really bad at time-based estimating when it's large, when things are large. If I was to take you in front of a mansion from the outside and say, how long is it going to take you to vacuum all the rooms in this mansion? You would, whatever time you gave me would be completely wrong. You're like, I don't know, 4 hours, 3 hours, 2 hours. Like it's whatever you say is wrong. But if I take you to one specific room that's very small, or that's decent size, and say, how long do you think it'll take you to vacuum this room? Or you might ask me questions now. You might say, well, with or without the furniture? Okay, without the furniture. All right, about 3 minutes, 4 minutes, 5 minutes, and that will be a lot more accurate. So that's why in Scrum we do relative sizing at the higher levels in the product backlog level, but we do hour-based task at the task level, because typically tasks are less than a day's worth of work, and developers are really good at knowing a specific task, how long that's going to take, but not the overall. If you take all the tasks and roll it up to the feature, we're really bad about that. And then we're held to the date, right? And then so if you're using relative size, you can then more easily predict, which you kind of saw here, and you can give a proper range of between here and there. Because many use time-based estimating. Oh, it's going to be 2,000 hours to get all this done. That's all anyone's going to ever hold you to. And the problem with that is that I would draw it here, but the problem with that is, as you get smarter about the product, let's say it's 2,000 hours, and I'll just draw this on the screen real quick, just to visualize it. So let's say it's let me do a new page. Right here. I just draw it here. So let's say we have our product backlog, and we've sized everything here, and we put our estimates on all this stuff. So you have 2,000 hours of an estimate. 2,000 hours. All right, man hours. Or we did relative sizing and we have 300 points, right? That's the alternative. So relative sizing or man hours. The problem with the hours is that you have to size it all in the very beginning. So in the very beginning, you got to figure out, okay, how many hours is this whole thing going to take me? And as your team works down, sprint 1 gets it done, sprint 2 gets that done, sprint 3 gets that done. They've gotten smarter about the product. They understand more the environment. They understand more what they're doing. And so if you want to get an estimate on how long is it take to do the rest of this, you're going to have the team resize every single thing down here, because this thing that we thought would take 20 hours is really going to take maybe 8 hours possibly. And so you're constantly having to resize this, and you're way off in the beginning, and you're not going to get you're not going to get a more accurate estimate to get near the bottom possibly. Relative sizing, as they get smarter about the product, sprint 1, sprint 2, sprint 3, the size of this thing down here that was maybe an 8 or 13, we don't have to resize that because we used relative sizing. What happened instead is our velocity goes up. So that means we can pull more work in. So I don't need to waste the team's time of like resizing and resizing and resizing all the time. So hopefully that answers that question. What else do we have? I see a question in the chat. How long should a team be in place without changes before you can determine the average velocity? That's a good question. So velocity typically goes up in the very beginning. So your velocity typically goes up, 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 and then eventually it starts to stabilize something like this, where we have this like range here. So the length of that team, how mature are they? Depends on how they are. Usually it just depends. It's not really the length of time. It's almost like how many sprints or how long your sprints are. Because if you're doing 1 month sprints, that's going to be hard, because you're like 30 days, you got 1 data point. 60 days, you have 2 data points, right? 90 days now, you only have 3 data points. So that's going to be horrible to try to predict like how long, like what's this team's velocity, right? By 60 days, 90 days in, all right, this is probably accurate. This one, maybe even the second one. If you're doing 1 week sprints, for example, that's like you have a data point every single week, and you can see that trend. And so I can usually use that trend line to kind of figure out, okay, we're trending at this rate. Eventually we'll stabilize. So it depends on the length of your sprints, maybe, but if calendar time, I don't know. It depends. Every team's different. Maybe 2 months, right? Maybe 1, 2 months. That's just my preference, my opinion. But again, if it's 1 data point, I'm less confident in that than if it was every 2 weeks or every week. I don't know. Hopefully that answers your question somewhat, Shelly. So how many sprints should be completed for? Oh, so you only need 1. So if you velocity is measured in 2 ways. Either use what you know, so they complete 1 sprint and their velocity was 10. Based on the data, this is what it's at. Now, in reality, what I would say, okay, they're at 10. The data shows it's this. But knowing this team or just using my experience, I would say I'm going to assume they can double that velocity. So this is probably what's going to be, right? And then they do a second sprint. Maybe the second sprint, they end up doing 20 points and like really knock the socks off. Like, wow, that's amazing. So now we have 10 points and 20 points. The average is 15. So I'm going to base it now off of 15 velocity points. But I think there's still room for improvement. So if I wanted to try to take maybe a guess of what it really would be, I might say, well, let's assume they get to 2025. But I'm not going to do that in front of tell everybody about that, because then everybody will hold the team to that. Oh, you have to do 25 because Fred's alternate prediction showed 25. Like, I don't want that to get out. I'm going to use the real data. But if somebody like really pushes it to pushes me to the edge or to a wall, backs me into a corner, I'm going to say, look, I think it'll double the velocity. I think there's a good chance for that, but I'm not going to promise it. But if we do that and we're going to stay on trend, then we should be able to bring that data in. So, but usually you want 3 to 5 sprints before you get a good accurate velocity. Does that answer your question? And again, this goes back to why you want dedicated teams. So imagine this client product is over, and then you disband the team, then you got to form a new team. You got to start all over again. So it's like, keep that team together. Then you know the velocity from day one, what that velocity is. So at your app, so carryovers, right? So if you're having carryover after carryover after carryover, it's a good question there. Then you can't do this. Your team is not doing Scrum properly. They're not doing vertical slices, and this prediction goes out the window. So you have to really measure your team based on working product at the end of the sprint. That's the only things we care about, even at Clearly Agile. All our Scrum teams is you have to have a working product. You have to have something delivered that works. There's no carryover. I mean, there's going to be carryover, but the success of the team is based on working product. Because the problem is if you carry over, then you end up not being able to predict, right? And so what happens, let's say you have a 13-point backlog item in sprint 1, or what to say sprint 4, say the 4 sprints in, and they're working on this, and their average velocity, let's say, is 20, and so they do a 13-point backlog item and we'll say an 8-point backlog item. All right, so now we're looking at 21 points here possibly in sprint 4. Well, what happens is maybe they get the 13-1 done. Great, we want at least something done, but the 8-point they end up not getting done. So we carry it over to the next sprint 5, and we carry over this 8-point backlog item. Well, they don't get credit for the 8 points in that sprint. So their average was 20, we'll say. So in this sprint, they only get 13 points. So I average out the last 3 sprints, right? Maybe it's 20, if I just average out these two, I don't know what that comes to. Maybe it's like, what, 17? What's the average of that? 17 or something? So whatever that velocity comes out to, I'm just going to do that real quick. So that's a velocity of 13. Velocity is, I was close, 16.5, right? So that's a velocity of 16.5. So now their velocity is dropped from 20 to 16. Now let's say we're almost done with that 8-point story, and I'll wrap up after this. We're almost done with that 8-point story. Well, if you really were almost done and the velocity is really around 20, that means this 8-point story is already 90% complete. Let's say that's the case. So then we pull in a 5-point backlog item. We pull in maybe another 13 backlog item because we know that 8-point story is 90% complete, or at least that's what they say, right? And then the next sprint, if they got all those things done plus the 8, then they get credit for it. You only get credit for it when you deliver the whole thing. So now they end up doing 26 points in that sprint backlog. They ended up doing more because that story was almost already complete, right? So now I take the 26 plus the 16.5 plus the 20, and my average velocity now is 20.8, right? So they're back to where they were. So if they carry it over, they should not get credit for any of the points, and all of it should carry over. Right. And if they're doing this all the time carrying over, then something needs to change. They're pulling in too much work. Their stories are not clear. They're too big. Right. Or the Scrum Master needs to figure out what that root cause is. So hopefully that answers the questions. I hope you guys enjoyed the time today. We have we're going to end the session. With that, you'll get a pop-up for a survey just to tell us how well we did. And I appreciate your time. Thank you, everybody.